All right, if you give me about 10 minutes, I'm not going to promise you that you'll be 100%, but I will show you how to stop leaving VA rating increases on the table. Most veterans don't lose claims because they're wrong. They lose because it can be a very complicated process. And let's face it, there is free help out there, but they have limited resources. And that's why I do this. I've had a rough time with my first VSO, but what I found out throughout the process is that you just need to be a little bit educated before you go and reach out to them for help in some cases. In this video, I'm going to show you how to spot rating opportunities, adjust for upcoming VA changes, and just build a simple strategy. So whether you decide to file on your own or sit down with the VSO, I'm hoping that this video will help you. Now, first things first, just be aware that there are some changes that have either just happened or are upcoming. The first one is changes to the mental health. It just changed, so it is a little bit different. So if you are already rated for mental health, you're grandfathered in, and if you have a pretty decent rating, like a 50 or above, I would probably really consider leaving it alone unless you felt really comfortable that you and your VSO understand what could happen. I'd like to think that this one's a little bit easier to get a higher rating, but you just never know, and I don't want to see you get a decrease in your mental health rating if you're grandfathered in on the old system and it just worked better for you. So I would just be cautious about that. Make sure you understand the criteria and make sure you fit in the new category or the new changes in the right category that you're looking for. The next one is tinnitus. It's still out there. It's still a 10% rating, and I really feel like this one can still be a 10% rating either with the new changes, but I just haven't looked into it enough to know whether or not it will. I know it'll fall under, I think, Meniere's and hearing, but I haven't really dug into it. So just make sure you're cognizant of it, and if you don't have tinnitus, or if you do have tinnitus but you're not rated for it, definitely get in an intent to file so you can be grandfathered in if this does change soon. And then the last one is sleep apnea, and this one's a tough one because it's already difficult to get approved for it, but it is possible, and the new changes could be slightly to your disadvantage. So if you have it and you think you can get it service connected, I would start looking at that right now with an intent to file and developing the right evidence. Speaking of evidence, if you're going to put in for any increase or any new claim, evidence is so important. You need to first figure out what it is that you're trying to prove. And I think, I'd like to say that, I know that not every veteran understands this because I know I didn't in the beginning. I knew that I had to submit paperwork, but I just never really thought about it in this way. And so, I do think about it in this way now. I think about it in the sense of what am I trying to prove if I'm trying to send in an increase for something, or if I'm just trying to get something approved for the first time, or if I'm trying to appeal. I'm asking myself, if this was a denial initially, what did they say? What were my favorable findings? What did they say I didn't have? What am I trying to prove? Am I trying to improve service connection, or am I trying to take something that's already service connected and get an increase for it because I feel like they, underrated me or maybe I've gotten worse. And so, I'm trying to figure out those two pieces, and essentially I need to prove it. I need to prove it with some sort of evidence, and it's either going to be medical evidence or non-medical evidence. And both are, equally important. Obviously, medical evidence might sometimes carry a lot more weight, but I think non-medical evidence is important as well. And when we start thinking about medical evidence, there's a lot out there that, we may not think about. But, I would start with reading what the 38 CFR says if you're going for an increase, and just making sure that you have reliable evidence to show that, you meet that criteria. And some of that stuff can simply just be, notes that a doctor put into your file. And I'll tell you this, like I've had instances in my claims journey process where I found in doctor's notes that were so, hard to read, and not in the sense that they were trying to explain something, but just, numbers that they put on there or symbols that they put on there that I had to highlight for the VA rater to see it, to understand what it was saying. And in fact, I had to go talk to the doctor about what he meant by those notes, because a lot of these notes end up, going in after your appointment with the doctor. And if you don't understand what it means, make another appointment, or call the office and ask them to help clarify. And that might be one way to get your, to make your packet look, be as strong as it actually is. I remember talking to my doctor's office people, and them asking me, like, I don't understand why you need this to be more, specific. And I explained to them what I was trying to do. And they thought it was actually funny that the VA didn't understand that. But, sometimes these doctors just put notes on there and they're cryptic. So, I certainly understood that. And I understood that that was one way that would help my my claim at that time, and it did work. So look through your doctor's notes, look through your service treatment records when you were in the military. There might be something in there that you may have mentioned to a doctor during one of your evaluations, one of your annual physicals, that you don't even remember saying, but your doctor wrote it down, and maybe it was, cryptic. Maybe they didn't, make a big deal about it in words, but definitely look at that stuff. Images, x-rays, things like comments that your doctor made about images or x-rays, bringing those images into a new doctor to show them something might help them connect something or give you a nexus. And then, of course, there's always independent medical opinions, which are probably going to be something that you're going to pay for. And those are more for, like creating a nexus, or getting your, getting a professional to write, an expansive, opinion about whether or not they think that something's connected, or trying to help the VA understand why you should be increased on something. And then, of course, there's nexus letters, which I think everybody's heard of. But nexus letters is essentially just an independent medical opinion as well. But they're out there, and they're probably more well known as nexus letters versus IMOs. But those two are also very important pieces of medical evidence, and you can get your own personal doctor to write these. I kind of wrote up something on my website that talks about how I did it. It's you could find links to the website in the comment section below, but it's essentially informedveteran.com. And I know it's difficult to ask your doctor for things like that, but there are ways to do it. And then, of course, there's always services out there that will allow you to pay for medical opinions or nexus letters. Just make sure you're doing your due diligence on that. I think that a lot of them were previously C&P examiners who saw that they could help more people and probably make more money by doing that. I think they are able to give you a little bit more time than they can do it in a C&P exam. So, those are definitely out there. And then there's non-medical evidence, which I think is really important. Personal statements especially. I viewed, and I didn't do this every time, but on a lot of my claims, I viewed the personal statement as an opportunity for me to explain what the condition is, why it's connected, when it started, and how it impacts me. And I'll talk a little bit more about personal statements in here. A buddy letter is a great way. And buddy letters, by the way, can be statements from people you served with in the military that might be able to help you draw a picture for the rater to show that this was service connected based on, maybe an injury or something that happened to you while you were in the service. It could also be a way for maybe your spouse or an employer to document, how your condition impacts something at home or something at work, or even a friend who can talk about something that, they see in you, or some sort of observation that your condition may cause that, causes you to have a different, impact your social life. Letters, for sick, taking sick leave at work, missing work, anything, right? Like evaluations on something that, maybe you were struggling with something that, you can paint a picture that the reason you got a bad evaluation was because of something that was going on in your life from this condition. So, evidence is really going to be the key to any claim being won. If you don't know that already, that's in my opinion, that's the truth. But next is the personal statement. As I said, in your personal statement, you can really do it however you want. You can use the form that the VA provides. You can write it on a piece of white paper. You could type it on a Word document, whatever you want. Just make sure that when you do that, number one, you're signing at the end, and you're saying that your statement is true to the best of your knowledge. You're signing it, you're dating it, just to make it official. But you want that personal statement to answer specific questions. You don't want that personal statement to explain everything that happened to you in your life. You want to keep it concise. The raters don't have time, I don't think, to read everything that doesn't apply to you or doesn't matter. They want specific information to pull out of there. You want to put in there in the very top what condition you're claiming. Put down the diagnostic code on what it is. Say whether or not you're claiming it, direct to something that happened to you in the service. Say if it's a condition that you're claiming secondary to something else. Tell them if it's a presumptive condition. You just never know when you're getting a new rater that doesn't know or just has had training, but make their job easier so that they can find out what you're trying to do and they can quickly start putting together the pieces of the puzzle. Talk about when it started. Talk about what the connection to service is, if that's applicable. If you're going for an increase, you don't need to explain the service connection all over again. You could say this is already a service connected condition and I'm requesting an increase, but you don't need to explain why it was service connected. Don't make this job harder. You could talk about what types of symptoms you experience. Make sure you read the 38 CFR before you do this. Make sure you know that whatever you're planning to do, if you're trying to get an increase, make sure that it actually makes sense to get an increase. If you look at 38 CFR and you have a 30% rating for something, and that 30%, you already meet that criteria and you don't meet the next higher of 50, there's no sense in putting in a claim for that because you're just opening the door for, a denial. But if you do meet that criteria, make sure you explain why. Explain the symptoms you're dealing with. You can explain, other symptoms that aren't applicable, but make sure that you're at least touching on the ones that do apply so they can see that. Make sure you talk about how often you deal with these. What is the frequency? And then make sure you talk about how it impacts your life, right? Be honest with them. Explain to them, what it is that how it bothers you. I suggest when you're preparing to do a personal statement, take a few months and journal this, because if you're like me, when you sit down and you don't have notes to reference or to look back at, and you're having a really good day, you may be more like, this isn't really a big deal. Why am I doing this? I can handle this. You're right. You can handle this. But if it does have impact on you, then you might as well let the VA paint a real picture of this. And that's why I think journaling it and then using the journal to kind of draw back on so you can put the right words into your personal statement. Listen, keep it simple. Make sure it's all consistent. You can reference your medical records to show, to draw back on things. If you say, hey, when I was deployed during this time, or when I was in this vehicle accident, I went to the doctor, I said this, put in parentheses, or just say hey, this is documented in, a doctor's note on this date, whatever. And then I always highlight things on my medical records and I submit them in addition. I don't know if that helps, but that seems to be helpful for me, at least knowing that I have what I need to send to the VA. Conducting a self-assessment. So if your goal is to get an increase, you want to do a couple different things to get an overall increase. Okay. You want to look at all of your current connected conditions and you want to ask yourself, these are already service connected, but what has gotten worse? What has gotten worse, or what did I get underrated at? I want to make sure that I'm at the right percentage. So if I look at it and I'm 30% for something and I notice that I'm really should be at 50%, then I meet the next rating percentage criteria. And then that's the question that I'm going to ask myself. And I'm going to make sure that I jot that down. And that's going to be one of the conversations that I start talking to my VSO about while I'm collecting evidence to support that. I will also say that if you look in the comment section down below, I'm going to put a link to a Google Sheets document that I call the claims dashboard. And you can use that to kind of write some of this stuff down so that you have a dashboard that is, all set up and organized for you. And then you can use that to bring to your VSO meeting. This is a paid tool. I think I have it listed for $5. If you email me at info@informedveteran.com and you can't afford $5, I'll send it to you for free. But I did put a cost on there just so I can kind of, compensate myself for some time that I put into it. But it's a good, I think it's a good tool. It might be useful for you. There's pictures of it on the website, so it'll tell you, it might be helpful for you. It might not. But anyways, moving along. So we're looking at those current connected conditions, figuring out what's gotten worse and whether or not we meet the next rating criteria. Then we're going to move down to what was previously denied. Okay. Go back and read your decision letters. If you printed them out, just pull them out, look at them. If you didn't, go on va.gov, go onto your profile, find your decision letters. It will take you a while to pull up each one. But if you have a history of this, you want to make sure that you're getting everything, especially if your goal is to get your overall rating increased. Look at the ones that were denied. What were the favorable findings? Did they say that you had something like, hey, like this is, sir, I don't know. Whatever it was this service connected? Yes or no? Did you have a diagnosis at the time? Yes or no? What do you need to add evidence-wise to get it either service connected or whatever you were missing? My guess is it wasn't service connected or you didn't have a diagnosis. But is there anything in there that that since you've educated yourself a little more in this process that you could get approved? And I bet you there will be, one or two that you're like, hey, I think I can do this. Maybe I need some help from a doctor, but I still feel strongly that this should be connected. Write that one down. That's going to be a target for you. The next one is presumptive conditions. Okay. A lot of you listening to these videos, you may qualify for the PACT Act. There's a lot of conditions on there. Did you miss any? Google the PACT Act, see if you have any of those conditions, see if you, based on where you've been deployed and the time frames, see if there's anything out there that you qualify for. And then, write those down, make sure that you put those in your journal or on the claims dashboard, whatever it is, because that should be something that you're shooting for. And then the last one is secondary conditions. So, by now you probably have a few ratings. Maybe you have some additional conditions. I want you to start looking in Google and figuring out, do I have any secondary conditions from other previously service-connected conditions? And if you do, then write those down. I do have, it's about a 5-page sheet of potential secondary conditions to a bunch of common conditions. If you type secondary down in the comment section below, I'll send you that as a swipe file. Easy peasy. It's not, perfect. It doesn't mean that every one of those on there, will absolutely win, but it's a good way to kind of brainstorm whether or not you have a condition that might be connected. But you can also use Google to do that as well. All right. Just to end this, I had the free tools that I have is a secondary worksheet. As I said, I also have a rating worksheet. It just kind of has a bunch of conditions and then the criteria for each percentage. It's condensed, so it's not perfect, but if you look at that, that might help you out. I would really highly suggest using 38 CFR instead of that rating sheet, but I'll send it to you if you type ratings in the comment section down below. It might just be something, easy to have, but definitely, do your research on what conditions you're currently connected for to make sure that you're in the right rating criteria.